You've heard of the places that refuse to let go. Well, Saint-Rémy is one of them. Nestled in the south of France, it's a place where the silence is too heavy and the air smells like old secrets. Once a grand psychiatric hospital, it's now a museum, but the locals say the walls still remember the screams that never left. You can almost hear them if you listen closely. Stories say the patients were never truly released. Some say they were locked away for years, others say they were never there at all. And then there are the ones who vanished without a trace. The real mystery begins when you ask the locals what happened to the patients. Their eyes flicker and their voices drop. They don't answer, they just look away. So, what do you think? Was Saint-Rémy just a place of healing? Or was it a prison for the lost? And if the walls still remember, what are they trying to tell us? You ever heard of the asylum that became a place of both healing and horror? It started in 1862, when a wealthy Parisian doctor named Philippe Pinel opened this grand, white stone building near Saint-Rémy. The air smelled of lavender and antiseptic, and the walls held the promise of progress. The asylum was meant to be a sanctuary for the mentally ill, but it was also a place where the line between treatment and control blurred. Patients were dressed in clean, high-colored clothes, their hands tied to their beds, eyes wide with fear. But it wasn't just Pinel. The asylum was built on the land of a former convent, and its history ran deeper than anyone expected. The stone walls held secrets from centuries past, and the echoes of those who had been buried there never truly faded. By the 1890s, the asylum had become a place of both fame and infamy. It housed some of the most notorious patients in France, including a young woman named Berthe, who was said to have been locked away for a crime she never confessed to. And then, in 1907, the asylum was taken over by a new administrator, a man named Dr. Paul Broussais. He brought with him a new philosophy, one that would change everything. But what he truly brought was a new kind of silence. That's where our story begins. A place where the walls remembered every scream, and the silence spoke louder than any voice. You ever wonder what happens when a place forgets how to be quiet? You remember how things started off so quietly, like a soft sigh in the night. The first signs were just whispers, like the wind through the trees, or the rustle of old paper in a forgotten drawer. Then came the cold spots, like the chill of a forgotten memory. You could feel it even when the windows were closed. Something was watching, waiting, just beyond the edge of your senses. There were whispers in the walls, too, not quite words, but the sound of a child's laughter echoing from a room no one was in, or the sound of something being dragged across the floor in the dead of night. And then there were the dreams of being chased through the halls, of seeing a pale figure in the distance, of waking up with a chill running down your spine and the feeling that you were never truly alone. You thought you were just being dramatic, just imagining things. But then, you started to wonder, what if it was all real? What if something was still here, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself? You remember the whispers, don't you? The ones that slipped through the cracks of the asylum's ancient stone walls, like wind through hollow bones. They said a girl vanished in the dead of night, just like that. The nurses called it a freak accident. A girl, no older than 16, slipped in the dark and fell. But the records don't match. No fall, no injury, just a missing girl and a room that smelled of lavender and something else, something sweet and wrong. They say she was found days later, miles away, her clothes still on, her face frozen in a mask of terror. But no one saw her, no one heard her scream. Just the sound of a door slamming shut, and the silence that followed. To this day, the asylum's caretaker still hears it at night, a high, keening wail that echoes through the halls. It comes from nowhere and everywhere at once, like a child's voice trapped in a bottle waiting to be unsealed. And so, the silence grew, not from absence, but from something else entirely, something that still watches, still waits, and still remembers the girl who never left. I've spoken to several former patients who say they still hear the whispers of the garden walls. One woman told me she'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced she was being watched by someone in the tall grass. She said the voices were not of the living, but of those who had been locked away, screaming for help. One night, she claimed she saw a shadow in the window, moving like a hand reaching for her. Another nurse said she saw a woman in a white dress walking the halls at midnight, her face pale and her eyes hollow. When she tried to follow, the woman vanished like mist in the morning sun. These are not just stories. They are echoes of a time when the walls of Saint-Rémy held more than just stone. They held the weight of despair, the silence of the unheard, and the lingering voices of the forgotten. And if you ever find yourself near Saint-Rémy, listen closely. Sometimes, the silence silence is louder than the scream. We followed the trail of whispers, tracing the path of the asylum's crumbling stone walls and the ghostly footprints left in the dust of its forgotten halls. Every turn felt like a step deeper into the past, where time stood still. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old paper, like the pages of a diary that had never been closed. It was as if the silence itself was holding its breath. The most chilling find was a journal, its pages filled with frantic scrawls and a single word repeated over and over: help. The author had been locked away, but the words suggested something far more sinister than madness. As we left the asylum that night, the wind seemed to carry a whisper, soft, urgent, and just out of reach. It was as if the place itself was pleading for someone to listen. The investigation ended, but the questions remained. What happened here? Who was silenced? And why does the silence still echo so loudly? You know, the thing that never gets explained is the sound. The one sound that wasn't there. The night they found her, there was no scream, just silence. Like the world had held its breath. They said she was in a room, alone, with a window open, but no one heard her. No one saw her. Just a body, cold and still, with a glass of water beside her. No mark, no clue. Just a question that's never been answered. The doctors said she was never truly sick, just lost. And yet, no one could find her. Not in the asylum, not in the town. Just gone, like she'd never been there at all. Now, they say the place is quiet, too quiet, and sometimes when the wind shifts, you can hear it. Not a scream, just a whisper, a name, a question, a silence that never ends. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say Saint-Rémy's walls still echo with the cries of the mad, the lost, and the ones who never left. Some say the ghost of Dr. Morehouse still walks the halls, his shadow flickering in the corners of the long-abandoned wards. There are even those who say the asylum was never meant for the mad, that it was built to contain something far more ancient, something that still stirs in the deep, dark places of the earth. And then there are the locals, the ones who still live near the asylum. They say the place is cursed, that the silence is the truest scream of all. Even now, decades after the last patient left these halls, Saint-Rémy still whispers. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what it was they were trying to say? There are no official records of the missing patients. No bodies, no final words. Just the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing through empty rooms at night, and a single, unmarked grave in the asylum's forgotten garden. The last patient to leave Saint-Rémy was a woman named Madeline. She claimed to have seen the girl in the garden, but when asked what the child wanted, she simply said she wants to be remembered. And so, we return to the question that haunts Saint-Rémy to this day. Was it a ghost, a hallucination, or something far more sinister that the asylum tried to bury with its patients? You know, sometimes the most haunting places aren't the ones that scream, but the ones that whisper just a little too softly for us to hear. And sometimes, the silence between the screams is louder than the screams themselves. Now, let's step away from the silence and into the shadows where the next story begins. But first, let me warn you, some stories are best told with a cup of tea and a soft blanket. So, make yourself comfortable, and let's get started. You've heard of the Holocaust, but have you ever wondered what silence sounds like in a place where 300,000 souls vanished? This is Warsaw, where history doesn't just lie buried, it whispers. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. This is the ghetto. Once a wall of barbed wire and despair, now a place where the air feels heavy, like the weight of 1,000 unspoken names. It's not just a location, it's a memory. There are stories of voices in the night, of footsteps where no one walks. Some say you can still hear the echoes of the past if you know where to listen. But do you dare? The ghetto is more than a place, it's a question. What happens when you're forced to live in a world that's already decided your fate? What do you do when silence is louder than screams? Some say the spirits here are not angry, they're waiting. Waiting for someone to remember. Waiting for someone to finally give them a name. What would you say to them if you could? You ever wonder how a place can hold so much pain, yet remain so quiet? The Warsaw Ghetto wasn't just a wall and a gate, it was a world, a life, a home. And then it vanished. In 1940, the Nazis came with orders to confine the Jewish people. They sealed off a section of Warsaw, forcing hundreds of thousands into a space smaller than a city block. It was a prison, but they called it a ghetto. Inside, families lived in tiny apartments, sharing what little they had. Children played in the streets, and elders gathered to tell stories. But the peace didn't last. The Nazis brought hunger, fear, and eventually, unimaginable horror. The ghetto was a place of survival, resistance, and terrible loss. It was the birthplace of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. A brave act that changed the course of history, though at a terrible cost. And now, when you walk through the ruins of that place, you might feel it like a whisper, like a memory, like the echo of a voice that won't let go. You know how sometimes the first sign of trouble is just a whisper, like a breeze that doesn't quite belong? Well, in Warsaw, that whisper came in the form of a strange silence, as if the city itself held its breath. People began to notice the absence of voices. No laughter, no shouting, just an unsettling hush that clung to the air like a shadow in the corner of your eye. It was as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence, something that no one dared to name. And then, one by one, the stories began to change, not in tone, but in truth. The silence was no longer just a whisper, it was a warning. You ever wonder what it feels like to be trapped in a nightmare you can't wake from? Imagine the walls closing in, the air thick with smoke, and the sound of footsteps echoing through a world that's already gone. In the heart of the Warsaw Ghetto, during those dark days of 1943, people didn't just disappear, they were swallowed by the silence of a city that had no name for them. It wasn't just the bombs or the bullets that made them disappear, it was the erasure, the quiet destruction of the people who had once been a city, and then nothing. So when we think of the Warsaw Ghetto, we think of resistance, of courage, of a city that refused to be forgotten. But what about the ones who were never found, who were never named? That's the real horror of it, not just the violence, but the silence that followed. And sometimes, the silence is louder than any scream. I've read the accounts, but nothing prepares you for the raw truth of it. One survivor described the screams as if the whole world had been torn open, and the silence that followed was heavier than the air. Another told me how they could hear the voices of the dead whispering through the cracks in the walls, guiding the living toward the only hope they had left, the promise of a new life beyond the walls. These were not just stories, they were the last breaths of those who refused to be forgotten, their words etched into the silence of history, waiting for someone to listen. In the end, it wasn't just the Nazis who tried to erase them, it was the world that turned away, and now the ghosts are asking for their names back. We followed the trail of whispers through the archives, where time had turned the pages of history into brittle ghosts. The more we read, the more the silence spoke louder than words. A name kept appearing, one we hadn't expected to see again: Esther, a woman who had vanished without a trace. No records, no grave, just a name that lingered like a ghost in the margins of history. The deeper we dug, the more we found pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. A child's drawing, a ration card, a name that had been scratched out. These weren't just remnants, they were warnings. It wasn't just about the past. The present felt like it was holding its breath, as if the weight of what had been buried was still pressing down on the earth. And then, we found something that made the silence louder still: a diary, written in a trembling hand, its pages filled with questions that had no answers, and a name that had been erased. There's one detail that has never been explained, and it haunts me more than the rest. You see, the records don't mention how they died, just that they did. It's like a whisper in the dark, not quite there, but always waiting. It's not the numbers or the names that trouble me, it's the silence. No one was ever asked, no one was ever told, just gone. And yet, the stories keep coming, like ghosts in the walls of the past. And then there's the thing about the last names. Some were erased, some were never recorded. It's like the world didn't want to remember them at all. Just forget. So here's the question: what if the real horror isn't the killing, but the silence that followed? What if the greatest cruelty was not in the act, but in the refusal to name them? That's the one detail that has never been explained, and maybe that's the real mystery, why it was never asked. You know how some places just seem to hold their secrets tighter than others? The Warsaw Ghetto is one of those places. Even now, in the quiet of a modern city, the echoes of its suffering still linger in the air. Local elders still tell of the voices in the walls, whispers that drift through the cracks of old buildings, echoing the cries of those who were never heard. Some say that the ghosts of the disappeared. Others believe the ghetto's ghosts are not just of the dead, but of the living. That the pain of those who survived still lingers in the hearts of the people, and in the stories they pass down. And then there are the ones who say the ghetto never really left, that it lives in the names of the streets, in the way the wind howls through the alleys, and in the silence that follows every story told. So, when you walk through these streets, ask yourself, what are you hearing? What are you feeling? And what stories might still be waiting just beneath the surface? You see, even now, the echoes of that time refuse to fade. There are whispers, not from the wind, but from the walls. What if some souls still linger, trapped in the silence of a world they never left? Some say the air in that old tavern still hums with the voices of the lost. You can almost hear them, if you listen closely enough, just beyond the edge of hearing. But what do they want? And from whom? We have answers for so many things, but not for this. Not for the ones who never made it out. Not for the ones who never had a chance to be heard. And maybe that's why they still haunt us. So the mystery remains unresolved. unspoken. But it's not just a story, it's a question. And sometimes the best way to answer a question is to ask it again right here, right now. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes, like the Warsaw Ghetto, where silence was louder than screams. I wonder if the ghosts of those lost still walk these streets. Do they ever pause to remember the names we've long forgotten? Maybe the real horror isn't the ghosts, but the silence that lets them linger. I wonder, do you ever hear them? As we move on, I hope you'll carry with you the weight of these stories. For history is not just what's written, but what's remembered. You've heard of the Hollow, but have you ever stood at the edge of Priory Hill, where the trees seem to hush themselves and the wind whispers secrets only the lost can understand? Once a thriving monastery, it was abandoned in the 1700s, and ever since, the locals have said the place is watched by ghosts who walk in silence and vanish at dawn. There are stories of children who wander too far and never return, or of the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the trees at night, only to fade when you turn around. And then there are the lights flickering, ghostly, like fireflies, but never quite right. Some say they're the souls of the monks trying to find their way home. So, if you're ever wandering near Priory Hill, remember this. The wind is never just wind, and the silence is never just silence. Something is watching. You see that crumbling stone wall? That's where it all began. The Priory Hill was once a quiet place of prayer and peace, until a man named Thomas Wren came along with a dream of building something grander. Thomas was a wealthy landowner with a vision, but his dream was not for the people of the village. He wanted to build a grand estate for himself and his family, far from the noise of the world. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. But the villagers didn't take kindly to Thomas's plans. They saw his estate as a threat to their way of life, and they warned him that the land was cursed, that it had been haunted for generations. Thomas laughed at their warnings, but the land did not forgive him. The first tragedy came on a cold autumn night, when the wind howled like a banshee and the sky turned black as ink. The next morning, Thomas was found dead in his study, his face frozen in a look of terror. The villagers whispered that the land had claimed its first victim, and the curse had truly begun. And so, the legend of Priory Hill was born, a place where the past refused to stay buried and the silence was louder than any scream. You know how sometimes the first thing you notice is the smell, like a faint, sweet rot in the air, just before the storm? It's not unpleasant, but it's there like a whisper from the past. Then the birds stop singing, not just a momentary silence, but a complete absence, like the woods have been holding their breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. And then just as you're about to turn away, something flickers in the corner of your eye. A light, not from the sun or moon, but from the earth itself. Like the ground is glowing, just a little. You don't think much of it at first. After all, it's just a quiet hill, a place where the light seems to come from the ground. But you can feel that something is watching, waiting, and it's not going to let you go. You remember the night the lights went out? The sky turned the color of old blood, and the wind whispered through the trees like it was trying to tell us something we weren't ready to hear. The last time anyone saw Clara Henshaw, she was walking the path that led to the hollow, her coat flapping like a sail in the wind, her boots crunching on the frozen earth. They say she was looking for something someone lost in the hollow. But what she found, no one can say. Just the silence of a place that refuses to forget. And now, every time the wind howls through the trees, it sounds like her voice calling, not from the hollow, but from the silence itself. I've spoken to dozens of locals, but one story lingers. A woman named Mabel, now in her 80s, insists she saw a light glowing from the hill one foggy October night. She said it wasn't the moon, it was a soft, golden hue, like a lantern burning through the mist. She said the light moved slowly, like it was searching. Then, as she tried to follow, the glow vanished. She never found the source, but she's sure it was natural. It felt alive, like it was waiting for her. She's never told anyone about it, not even her family. She said the voice would only speak to her when she was alone, and it always ended with a whisper, "Come back, Ruth." She's been avoiding the hill ever since. There's also the farmer who claims his cows refuse to cross the hill at night. They stand at the edge, trembling, as if they've seen something. He said one time he watched a figure in the light, just a silhouette, but it looked familiar, like someone he knew. And then there's the young girl who told her mother she saw a glowing figure in the woods. The mother said the girl was playing with her dolls, and when she came back, the dolls were all facing the same direction, toward the hill. Their eyes were wide and glowing, like they were alive. We started with the basics: old maps, old records, and the kind of quiet determination that comes from a lifetime of telling stories. The first thing we found was a ledger tucked away in the archives with names and dates that didn't quite match up. The names were familiar, but the dates were off by years. It was like someone had tried to rewrite history, but left the wrong ink behind. We wondered, was this a cover-up or a cover story? Next, we looked into the local cemetery, where the names of the missing had been carved into the stones. But some stones had been broken, and others had been moved. The caretaker said he hadn't seen the changes in decades. Then there was the diary, found in a boarded-up cottage. It was written in a woman's hand, but the entries were about a man who never existed. The entries were full of longing, fear, and a kind of quiet obsession with a place called Priory Hill. The final clue came from a neighbor who claimed to have seen a light in the woods at night. Not a fire, not a lantern, but a soft, golden glow like a lantern held by an unseen hand. And it always seemed to move toward the hill. What we found wasn't just a story, it was a mystery with a heart. And if you've been listening closely, you might have realized that some of these clues were pointing to a very real person, and a very real pain that never left the hill. You know how sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that don't make sense? That's what this is. No one can say for sure what happened that night in 1947. The only thing that's always been left out of the story is the one detail that no one ever asked about. Just a single sentence in the article, written in a shaky hand, that no one has ever tried to explain. It was written like a whisper, almost like a warning, and no one has ever figured out why that one sentence was left out. It's the only thing that still lingers like a ghost in the story. So here's the thing, dear listener, the story is missing that one piece, and maybe that's why the place still hums with something unresolved. You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals really whisper. They say the hollow isn't just empty, it's a mirror, and the light in it shows you what you've forgotten. Some say the light is the ghost of a lost child trapped in the moment she vanished. Others say it's the spirit of a woman who tried to save her, and now she's stuck between the two. There's even a theory that the light isn't real at all. That is just the brain's way of making sense of the silence, the absence, the way the wind stops when you're near it. But if you ask the old ones, they'll tell you the light's been there as long as they can remember, and that it's not just a memory, it's a warning. So, what do you think? Is it a ghost, a trick of the mind, or something else entirely? And why does it always seem to call you back, no matter how far you run? You know, sometimes the most unsettling things are the ones that never quite make sense. The missing girl, the cold spots, the whispers, no one can say for sure what happened, but we all feel it. The sheriff's file is closed, but the case is never truly closed. People still talk about the hollow, still feel the cold, and still wonder if the girl ever made it home. We may never know the truth, but that's the thing about the luminous hollow, it doesn't need an answer. It just needs to be remembered. So here's to the girl, and to the stories that outlive us. May the hollow always hold its secrets, and may we never stop wondering. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers, like the wind that never stops, or the trees that never sleep. We leave these stories behind like breadcrumbs, hoping someone will follow them back to the light and maybe, just maybe, to the truth. But always remember, the dark isn't the enemy, it's just waiting for you to listen. And now, as the night deepens, I'll leave you with one final question. What if the light you see isn't the end but the beginning? You've heard of the Ritz Paris, the glittering heart of Parisian luxury. But did you know it once echoed with the sound of shattered glass and whispered regrets? This place, once a beacon of opulence, now hums with a different kind of energy. Back in the 1920s, the Ritz was more than a hotel, it was a stage for the elite, where the rich danced into the night, and secrets were traded for champagne. But beneath the glamour, something darker was brewing. The rumors start with a single story, a ball, a scandal, and a body found in the marble courtyard. But the truth, that's what makes this place so fascinating and so unsettling. As you step inside, you feel it, the weight of history pressing against you. The Ritz Paris is more than a hotel. It's a haunted memory, a place where the past refuses to stay buried. You ever been to a ballroom where the music never stops, but the dancers never leave? The Ritz Paris wasn't just a place for elegance, it was a stage for secrets, and the champagne flowed like blood. In the 1920s, the Ritz Paris was the beating heart of Parisian high society. Celebrities, artists, and the elite all came to sip champagne and dance the night away, though not everyone left with their dignity intact. But behind the glittering surface, rumors swirled. Some said the Ritz was a place where fortunes were made and where they were also lost. A few guests vanished without a trace, their names fading like ink in water. The police dismissed the disappearances as mere gossip, but but the staff knew better. They whispered of a ghostly figure in the halls, a woman with a red dress and a tragic past, who still walks the ballroom, forever dancing the waltz of her last night. Now, when you walk through those doors, you can feel it, the weight of history, the echo of laughter, and the lingering sorrow of a woman who never got to leave. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You remember the way the chandeliers glowed in the ballroom, like the stars were trapped in crystal. But there was a change in the air, a shift in the light, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The musicians played on, but their music felt heavier, like it was carrying the weight of a long-forgotten secret. The dancers moved slower, their steps echoing in a way that didn't match the rhythm of the music. A guest stumbled, and for a moment, you saw their face in the mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, and unmistakably familiar. But when you turned, they were still laughing, still dancing, still very much alive. The laughter faded, replaced by a silence so thick it pressed against your ears. You looked up, and the chandeliers were gone. All that remained was a ceiling of blackness, as if the room had been swallowed by something vast and nameless. And then, just as you thought you'd lost your grip on reality, a voice whispered from the darkness, "You'll never leave here, my darling. Not unless you find the key." You ever notice how the most glamorous places often hide the darkest secrets? The Ritz Paris, with its shimmering chandeliers and velvet drapes, was no exception. Behind its opulent facade, something truly sinister happened in the early 1900s. It started with a young Russian ballerina named Vera Kovalchuk, who arrived in Paris with dreams of stardom and a heart full of hope. But the Ritz wasn't just a place for dancing, it was a trap. Vera vanished without a trace. No ransom, no body, just silence. The Ritz closed its doors for a week, and the police found nothing. But the staff swore they saw her in the mirror, dancing alone in the ballroom. To this day, the Ritz Paris still has a reputation for being haunted by the ghost of a ballerina, caught between the light of fame and the shadows of her fate. Some say she's still waiting for someone to dance with her. I've heard from a former ballerina who danced in the Ritz's Grand Hall in the 1930s. She said the air felt thick with something ancient, like the walls were holding their breath. She swore she saw a woman in a white dress floating just above the floor, her face never quite in focus, like she was caught between worlds. One guest claims they heard a low, echoing hum in the midnight hours, like the music of a long-dead orchestra still playing in the bones of the building. And then there's the man who said he saw a red stain on the floor, not from wine or blood, but from something that had never been clean. These accounts don't add up to a story, but they add up to something. Something that lingers in the silence between the notes of a forgotten song. We started by combing through old newspapers, and what we found was more than just dates and names. It was a tapestry of whispers, rumors, and half-truths. Some claimed the ballroom itself was cursed. Others swore it was the music that lured them in. One article from 1933 mentioned a young woman who vanished during a midnight waltz, leaving behind only her fan and a single, blood-stained rose. No one ever found her, and no one ever explained how she got there in the first place. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me is that no one ever figured out how the blood got there. Just a few drops, but enough to stain the floorboards. You think about it, how does a single drop of blood end up in a ballroom that's been scrubbed clean for decades? It's like someone left a tiny, tragic secret behind. Maybe it was a lover's last kiss, or a final act of defiance. But no one ever said a word about it. You wonder if they knew, or if they just didn't want to think about it. It's the one thing that lingers. Not the ghosts, not the whispers, but that single drop. Like a message in a bottle left for someone to find. But no one has ever found it. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't want to talk about it. And that's the thing, isn't it? The mystery that doesn't need to be solved. Just remembered, like a whisper in the dark, waiting for someone to listen. You wonder if you're the one who will finally hear it. You've heard the stories about the Ritz Paris, but have you ever wondered what the locals actually whisper in the bar? Some say the ghosts of the lost lovers still sip champagne in the shadow of the chandeliers. Others claim the blood from that tragic night still stains the marble floors. And if you listen closely, you can hear the echo of a woman's voice calling for help. Some say the real tragedy is that no one ever found the bodies, and the city has chosen to let the mystery linger, like the scent of perfume in the air long after the guests have left. And then there are the tourists, who come for the glamour, but leave with a lingering sense that they were never truly welcome in the house of blood and beauty. You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. The Ritz Paris, with its grandeur and gold, has its own ghosts, ones that still whisper in the halls, even now. There's a rumor, a story passed down from the waiters and concierges, that one night in the late 1940s, the music stopped, the laughter faded, and a woman walked into the mirror never to come out. The hotel has long denied any involvement, but the staff still tell the same story of a woman who vanished in a place that never forgot her. Some say she's still there, waiting for someone to find her. The mystery isn't just about the woman, it's about the silence that followed. The Ritz Paris is still a place of beauty and luxury, but sometimes beauty can hide the most terrible truths. And if you ever find yourself there, remember, some doors don't just open. Some doors just wait for the right person at the right time. You walked through the echoes of a ballroom where laughter once danced like fireflies, but now it's just the ghosts of 100 lost dreams. What do you think lingers in the silence? The Ritz Paris may be a place of elegance now, but the past clings to its walls like a perfume you can't quite shake. Have you ever felt something watching you in the mirror? We all carry secrets, don't we? Some are buried, others just wait in the shadows, ready to whisper when the lights go out. Have you ever wondered what your own ghosts might say? Before we move on to the next tale, let me ask you, what if the Ritz Paris wasn't just a place of luxury, but a stage for something far more sinister? What would you do if you found out? The ghosts of the past are never far away. They just wait for the right moment to remind us they're still here. And sometimes they're waiting for us. You've heard of the Tower of London, haven't you? That hulking stone fortress on the Thames, where history and horror have always danced hand in hand. But let me tell you, it's not just bricks and mortar, it's a place where whispers linger like smoke. For centuries, it's been the seat of power, a prison, a treasury, yet the stories of what goes on behind those ancient walls are far more terrifying. You know, they say the tower isn't just haunted by the dead, it's haunted by the silence of the ones who were never heard. You've read the stories, but have you ever wondered what it would feel like to walk those corridors at night? To hear the creak of the floorboards, to feel the cold air settle in your bones, and to wonder if the silence is just the absence of sound or something else entirely. The tower has a reputation, but it's not just about ghosts. There are disappearances, unsolved mysteries, and a history that's as dark as the night outside its walls. So, as we step into this story, let's not just listen, we should feel the weight of the silence. And remember, dear listener, the tower is more than a place. It's a memory, a warning, and a whisper in the dark. So let's not just imagine what happened here, let's imagine what it feels like to be here. The Tower of London was built in 1066, right after the Norman Conquest, and it wasn't just a castle, it was a prison, a treasury, and a symbol of power. You ever imagine what it felt like to walk those stone halls, knowing you were never truly safe? The first prisoners were real people, some nobles, some commoners locked away for treason, heresy, or just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't just a place, it was a fate. The tower also housed the crown jewels, a treasure that made it a target for thieves and power-hungry kings. But for the prisoners, it was a place of despair, where hope was often lost as quickly as it was found. Over the centuries, the tower saw executions, secret betrayals, and the rise and fall of fortunes. It was a place where the line between king and commoner blurred, and the air was thick with secrets that never quite died. You know how sometimes the air just feels different, like it's holding its breath? That's what it was like that morning, as if the stones of the tower itself had forgotten how to breathe. The guards were all there, just like they always were, but something was off. The silence wasn't natural, it was too heavy, like a veil had been drawn over the place. The Queen's guards had always been the first to notice the strange things. They'd start to leave small offerings, bottles of wine, small crosses, like they were trying to appease something they couldn't name. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dove to the smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And then there were the dreams. Some of the guards would wake up in the middle of the night, their hearts pounding, with the sound of a child's voice echoing through the stones calling for help. But no one was there. It was the first time in centuries that the tower had felt like it was watching, waiting, and the air, which had always been thick with history, now felt like it was holding its breath for something to happen. You see it now, the stone steps leading up to the white tower, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, some of them never meant to return. The air is heavy with the weight of history, and the silence is louder than any sound. In 1475, the tower was a place of power and terror. The crown's most dangerous prisoners were held here, their fates sealed by the king's will. But some say the tower remembers them all, especially the ones who never made it out. One name haunts the tower more than the rest: Anne Boleyn. She was the king's wife, the mother of the future queen, and the woman who changed the course of English history. But her story ends in silence, in a place where even the wind refuses to speak her name. The tower was her prison, her executioner, and her grave, but the echoes of her final moments linger in the stones, a whisper of a woman who refused to be forgotten until the walls themselves decided to tell her story. They say her ghost still walks these halls, her voice a warning to those who would abuse power. But if you listen closely, you might hear it not in the halls, but in the silence where she once stood. I met a woman in London who claimed she saw a figure in the palace gardens at dusk. She said it was a woman, dressed in a 17th century gown, standing alone, never moving, just watching the world pass by. She said the figure never spoke, never ran, just stood there, as if waiting for something or someone. The only sound was the wind, and the occasional distant cry from the city beyond the walls. Another witness, a retired historian, told me he saw a ghostly woman in a white tower one winter night. He said she appeared in the window, just for a moment, and then vanished like smoke. He said she looked like a queen or a prisoner, and that her eyes followed him as he passed. He never told anyone, not even his wife, because he feared it would make him lose his mind. These aren't just stories, they're echoes. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the silence between the screams. We followed the old maps and whispered legends, tracing the tower's foundations like a ghost in the dark. The air felt heavier, as if the stones themselves remembered the screams. The archaeologists found something unexpected: shards of pottery with strange symbols and a single, unmarked grave beneath the white tower, untouched by time. In the archives, they uncovered letters from the 1600s, written by a maid who claimed to hear voices in the night, not from the living, but from the dead. One document mentioned a woman's named Jane whose last known words were a plea for help, written in her own blood, but no one could say where she'd gone. The deeper we dug, the more the past refused to stay buried. It felt like the tower was trying to tell us something, but in a language we couldn't quite understand. And so, we left with more questions than answers, the weight of history pressing down on us, like the tower itself was still holding its breath. You know, the thing that still haunts me is the one detail that has never been explained: the silence. It's not just the silence of the stones, it's the silence of the missing voice. They say the tower was built on the site of a much older monastery, but no one knows what happened to the monks who lived there. Some say they were taken by the crown, others say they vanished in the night. The mystery deepens when you consider the tower itself. It's not just the ghost of the past, but the echoes of something still unresolved, something that refuses to be buried. And yet, no one has ever found the body. No one has ever found the voice. It's as if the tower is holding its breath, waiting for someone to ask the right question. So what do you think? Was it a curse, a cover-up, or something even older than the tower itself? I'll tell you this, the silence is still there, waiting for you to hear it. You've heard the tales of the bloody tower, but what about the ones that whisper in the shadows of the white tower? Some say the spirits of the crown's secrets still linger in the stone, waiting for the right moment to speak. There's a legend that the tower holds the voices of the executed, not just the innocent, but the ones who knew too much. Some say their whispers can be heard on stormy nights, when the wind howls like a morning crowd. Others believe the tower is haunted by the ghost of Anne Boleyn, not the one who died in the tower, but the one who ruled before her. Some claim she still walks the halls, searching for the truth she was denied. Then there are the more modern stories of disappearances, of hidden chambers, of coded messages left behind by the last prisoners. The tower is a place where history is not just remembered, but felt. And if you listen closely, just when the wind is still and the silence feels too heavy, you might hear it. A whisper, a sigh, a voice that isn't quite yours. It's the tower's way of saying, I remember. And still, the tower's secrets whisper through the cracks of its ancient stones. Some say the echoes of the crown jewels theft still linger in the vaults, a silent scream of betrayal that never found its voice. The crown jewels were never found, and neither was the thief. Some believe the tower itself guards that mystery, as fiercely as it guards its history. The tower has held many secrets, but this one remains locked away. A mystery that outlives the centuries, like a ghost that refuses to be laid to rest. So next time you pass the tower, remember some stories are never told, and some screams are never heard, but they're still there, waiting. You can almost hear the stones whispering, but they're not telling you what you want to know. They're just waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. Some say the ghosts are not bound by time, but by memory. They linger where the past refuses to let go. And sometimes, the most haunting silence is the one that follows a story we're not yet ready to hear. So, as we turn the page, let's not forget that the past is never truly gone, it just waits for us to listen. And now, dear listener, let's step into the next story where the silence is louder than the scream. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place whispered about in the shadows of history, where secrets have festered for centuries. It's not just a building, it's a tomb for the damned. Nestled in the French countryside, it's a place that seems to breathe with the weight of its past. The air here is thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something that clings to the stones like a ghost. The Priory is more than a ruin, it's a sanctuary for the lost, the tortured, and the forgotten. Some say the walls hum with the voices of the dead, their whispers echoing through the corridors like a lullaby of sorrow. There are stories of monks who vanished without a sound, of bloodstains that never fade, of a single candle that burns for hours in the dead of night. The Priory is a place where the veil between the living and the dead is thin. To walk its halls is to feel the weight of history pressing down on you. It's not the cold or the darkness that chills you, it's the feeling that you're not alone, that something ancient and terrible is watching. And so, we begin our journey into the heart of the Priory of Sion, where the echoes of the past refuse to be silenced. Let's step inside and see what secrets lie waiting in the shadows. You know, the Priory of Sion didn't start as a place of terror. It began as a refuge, a secret brotherhood of scholars and mystics, hiding from the church, sharing knowledge, and keeping ancient wisdom alive. They called themselves the Brothers of the Sun, a name that would later haunt them. Their mission was to protect sacred texts and symbols, but they also had a secret. They were guarding something far more dangerous than books. They were scholars, yes, but also visionaries. Some believed they had the key to unlocking the divine, while others whispered that they were dabbling in forbidden powers. It's said that their secrecy bred both brilliance and madness. But as the centuries passed, the Priory became more than a secret society. It became a fortress, a place where the line between knowledge and obsession began to blur, and where the whispers of the past refused to die. So you see, the story of the Priory of Sion is not just about ghosts. It's about the choices people make when they choose to protect the past, and how that past can return to haunt them. You remember how things started to feel off, like the air had changed, and the silence was too heavy for the time of day. The monks began to say the prayers a little too late, and the bells rang a little too soon. It was as if the old place had its own rhythm, and it wasn't happy with the new ones. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. One morning, the cook found the soup too hot, and the bread too stale. No one could explain it, but the air smelled like something had been burned in the night. Then came the whispers, soft, like the wind through the trees, but not the trees. They seemed to come from the walls, from the stones, from the very air that had once been warm and safe. The nuns began to dream of things they had never seen, and the monks started to forget things they had once known. The Priory was changing, and no one could say how. And then, one by one, the voices grew louder, not just in the dreams, but in the waking world. The Priory had a story to tell, and it wasn't one that had been told before. You see it now, the moment frozen in time. A woman in a high-collared nightgown, her face pale as milk, standing at the foot of a grand staircase, her hands raised as if to stop the world from turning. She's not running, she's waiting. For what? No one knows, but her eyes, those eyes hold the weight of 1,000 unsung prayers, and a single tear runs down her cheek, catching the light like a secret. Then, the silence breaks. A door slams shut, the light flickers, and the woman turns, not toward the sound, but away from it toward the staircase, as if the past is calling her back. She steps forward, one foot after another, and with each step, the house seems to grow colder. The air thickens, the walls close in, and the silence becomes a living thing. And then nothing. No sound, no light, just the echo of a scream that never came, and the woman's silhouette, frozen in place, her hands still raised, as if she was never meant to move forward. I had a visitor once, a man named Frank, who swore he saw the Priory's ghost during a storm. He said it was a woman, wearing a dark blue dress, standing at the gate, watching him like she knew his name. He told me he couldn't look away, even though he knew it wasn't real. He said she raised her hand like she was trying to wave him in, but the wind pulled her dress down and she vanished into the storm. Another woman, a former nun, claimed she heard the Priory whispering in the night. She said it wasn't a voice, but a sound, like someone was trying to speak through the walls, but it was always just out of reach. She described the sound as a low hum, like a heartbeat, but it would shift. Sometimes it would sound like a child crying, other times like a man in pain. She couldn't explain it. but she knew it wasn't just her imagination. The most unsettling account came from a retired teacher who said he saw a child shadow running through the priory's courtyard, even though no one was there. He said it wasn't a ghost, but something else, something that had been left behind. He never told anyone, but he said the shadow followed him home, and he could hear the child's voice calling his name. He said it was the only time he ever felt truly alone. We followed the trail of whispers, the faintest echoes of past that refused to fade. The air here was heavy, like it held its breath, waiting for something to stir. The investigation led us to a dusty ledger, its pages brittle with time. It spoke of secrets buried beneath the earth, and of a name that had been erased from history. We found no bodies, but we found something else, symbols carved into the stone, their meanings lost to time. They seemed to hum beneath our fingertips, like a forgotten song. The deeper we dug, the more the past seemed to resist us. It whispered warnings in the silence between the lines, and in the silence, we heard more than we should have. There were moments when the air would grow cold without reason, and the flicker of a candle would dance like it was alive. The past was watching, waiting for us to understand. And in the end, we left with more questions than answers. The tormented souls of the Priory of Sion still wait, just beyond the veil of time, for someone to hear their story. You ever notice how some secrets just refuse to die? Well, this one has been buried for centuries, and yet it keeps coming back like a ghost in the attic. No one knows why it happened, but it's still the one thing that haunts this place more than any spirit. It's not the murder, not the disappearance, not even the whispers in the halls. It's something far simpler and far more sinister. A detail so small it should have been forgotten, but somehow it's the key that no one can unlock. The thing is, no one has ever been able to find the body. Not even the last caretaker, who said he searched every inch of the grounds. He swore he felt something, but he never found it. And now, the place is empty. Just ghosts and a mystery that won't let go. So here's the thing, dear listener, if you're ever curious about the one detail that has never been explained, you might want to ask the walls. They've been waiting for someone to listen, for someone to finally remember what was lost. You've heard the stories, but some folks still think the Priory's ghosts are just a cover for something darker. They say the monks were hiding more than just secrets, maybe they were hiding people. Some say the stones of the Priory still remember the ones who vanished. They whisper of hidden chambers, of bodies buried beneath the cloister, and of a secret so heady, it's kept the place cursed for centuries. There's talk of a lost manuscript, one that could explain everything or unravel the whole thing, but no one's found it, and the people who search often vanish without a trace. The locals still gather at the edge of the woods, exchanging furtive glances and hushed words. They know the place has a story, but they also know some stories are better left unspoken. And if you're ever in the area, listen closely. Sometimes the air feels heady, and the silence is too loud. The Priory doesn't just haunt the stones, it haunts the people who live near it. You know, sometimes the most unsettling things aren't the ghosts we see, but the ones we never find. The ones who vanish into the shadows, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. The last known sighting of the missing monk was in 1572, just before the Priory was abandoned. He was last seen walking toward the chapel, his hands clasped in prayer, his face bathed in the pale light of dawn. Some say he was taken by the Inquisition, others that he fled to protect his secret. But the truth, it's buried beneath the rubble, just like the rest of the Priory's secrets. And yet, the stories don't end here. Every year, on the anniversary of the Priory's fall, people say they hear a faint chant echoing from the ruins. A melody, ancient and mournful, carried on the wind. So, dear listener, what do you think? Is the monk still wandering the stones, or did he finally find peace in the very place he was betrayed? Or is he waiting for someone to finally listen? No matter the answer, one thing is certain. The Priory's ghosts are still here, and they're not done telling their stories yet. You walked through the shadowed halls of the Priory of Sion, felt the weight of its secrets pressing on your chest like an old, unspoken promise. But sometimes, the most haunting echoes are the ones you don't hear at all. The ghosts here don't shout, they whisper, and they whisper in the language of the lost. You can almost hear them, just beyond the edge of your hearing, waiting for you to turn around. And when you finally do turn, there's nothing, just the silence that feels like a presence, and the knowledge that you've stepped into a story that's been waiting for you. So, as you leave this place, remember, the Priory of Sion doesn't end here. It lingers, like the memory of a song you can't quite place, and like the feeling that something or someone is still watching. Now, I'll leave you with a question. Have you ever felt the weight of a place so strongly that you wondered if it was you who had been waiting for it? You've heard of the Eiffel Tower, the Seine, the Louvre, but have you ever wondered what lies beneath the city where the light never reaches? I'm talking about the catacombs of Paris, a place where time seems to stop and the air is thick with secrets. These catacombs were once a mass grave for Paris's poor, but they've since become a labyrinth of bones and whispers. Some say the dead still walk here, their voices echoing through the tunnels like a lullaby from the grave. There are stories of people who entered and never came out. Some say they were lost, others say they were taken. And then there are the whispers, so faint you have to strain to hear them, but they're there, just waiting for you to listen. But don't take this lightly, these catacombs are not just a place. They are a memory, a warning, and a story that refuses to be forgotten. And if you're listening, you might just be the next one to hear the whispers and not be able to leave. Back in the 17th century, Paris was a city of secrets, and the catacombs were just one of many hiding places. The bones of the dead were moved from the city streets and buried in tunnels beneath the city, a way to clear the streets for the living. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The work was brutal, done by prisoners and the poor, who were forced to dig through the earth and move the bones. It was a grim punishment, but one that kept the city moving forward. The people of Paris didn't know the full truth for a long time. They only knew that beneath their feet lay a secret, and that the dead had been moved, but not all of them had found peace. And so, the catacombs became more than just a place of burial. They became a place of mystery, a whispering place where the past still lingers, and where the stories of those who were buried still echo through the stone. You remember the sound of the rain, how it whispered against the windows, like someone was trying to get in. Then came the smell something damp, like the earth had opened up and let out its breath. The first time it happened, it was just a voice, a woman's voice, soft and sad, calling from the dark. I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it again and again, always from the same place. Then came the cold, not just the chill of the night, but cold that clung to your skin, like something had brushed against you and left its mark. The whispers grew louder, and the cold got worse. It wasn't just the wind or the damp, something was watching, waiting for you to step too close. You might have felt it too. That strange, knowing feeling, like the earth itself was whispering your name. And it wasn't just a name, it was a warning. You see it now, the moment the last light died in the catacombs. A figure, small and shrouded, vanishes into the shadows between two rows of bones. The air grows colder, and the silence is absolute, save for the faintest whisper. The caretaker, a grizzled old man with a lantern in hand, calls out, but his voice is swallowed by the walls. No echo, no answer, just the sound of his own breath. Days later, the caretaker returns to find the lantern shattered on the floor, the light gone. The tunnel is still, and the only thing left is a single white rose crushed beneath his boot. The rose was never there before. It's as if the place itself has taken something that was never meant to be found. And to this day, the catacombs whisper of that night, of a figure that vanished, of a rose that bloomed in the dark, and of a man who never found his way back. I'd spoken to a few people who claimed they heard the whispering in the catacombs. One woman said it was like 1,000 voices speaking at once, but not in words, just a deep, endless murmur. Another man told me he was there on a foggy night, and when he turned around, there was a figure in the distance, too tall, too thin, with eyes like black glass. Some say the whispers are the voices of those who were buried alive or those who never found peace. Others think it's the sound of time itself, echoing through the bones of the city. But no one can say for sure. The whispers don't stop. They just get louder and deeper and more real until you can't tell what's real anymore. We spent weeks combing through archives, poring over brittle pages and faded maps. Every lead seemed to lead to another ghost, and the more we dug, the more the walls of the catacombs seemed to close in. One night, as I sat alone in the quiet of the library, I heard it a whisper, just above the sound of the clock ticking. It was the same voice from the stories, the same voice that had haunted me since the first night. One of the most disturbing finds was a 19th century ledger, filled with names and dates, many of them marked as lost. The entries were vague, almost poetic, as if the writer had been trying to remember something they were afraid to forget. The deeper we went, the more I felt the weight of the past pressing down on us. It wasn't just the history of the catacombs, it was the silence of the people who had once lived there, and the silence of those who had never returned. In the end, we didn't solve the mystery, but we found something more valuable, a connection, a shared sorrow, and a reminder that some stories are never meant to be finished. You've heard the whispers, you felt the chill, but there's one thing that's never made sense. Why did they build the catacombs in the first place? The answer is buried in the bones of the city, but no one's ever really figured it out. Some say it was to hide the dead, others that it was a way to keep the city from choking on its own people. But no one can say for sure. And that uncertainty? That's what makes it feel like the catacombs are still whispering. You can't help but wonder, was it a mercy or a madness to take the dead and put them in the dark, where they could never be found, never be remembered, never be free. And still, the whispers go on, not because they're haunted, but because they're unanswered, the one detail that has never been explained. And maybe that's the real ghost. Some say the whispers come from the children of the revolution, still angry at the ones who buried them alive. Others say they're the voices of the poor, trapped beneath the stones of the city that forgot them. A local baker once told me the walls are still warm in the summer, like they're holding on to the heat of the bodies that sleep there. He said you can hear the bones creak if you listen closely. There's a theory, whispered in the back rooms of old cafes, that the catacombs are actually a vast network of tunnels leading to the Seine. Some say the missing people are still there, waiting for the right moment to surface. And then there are the ones who say it's not the dead who whisper but the living. That the catacombs are a mirror, reflecting back the guilt and secrets of those who walked them, still unresolved. And yet, the story doesn't end here. The catacombs still whisper, and no one knows if they're telling the truth or just echoing the past. The last official search for the missing girl was abandoned in 1972, but some say the echo of her laughter still lingers in the narrow tunnels. Today, the catacombs are a place of pilgrimage for the curious, but for some, they're still a place of unanswered questions. And so, the whispering catacombs of Paris remain both a tomb and a promise, waiting for someone to listen and to believe. You've heard the whispers, felt the weight of history, and now you're left with more questions than answers. What if the past isn't just buried, it's waiting? The catacombs may be silent now, but they're not empty. Every echo, every shadow reminds us that some stories refuse to be forgotten. So, as we turn the page, remember this: the past is never truly gone. It lingers in the air, the silence, and the stories we're too afraid to tell. Until next time, keep your ears open and your heart a little lighter, but never too light. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place where history whispers secrets and silence screams louder than words. It's said to be hidden in the heart of the French countryside, where the land itself seems to hold its breath. The air there is thick with something older than time, and the stories that surround it are as murky as the brook that runs beside it. Some say the priory was a refuge for scholars. Others say it was a prison for the damned. Whatever the truth, it's not a place you leave unchanged. You might ask, why does this place still haunt the imagination of so many? Well, I'd say that's a question best left to the wind. Now let's step back to the year 1180, when the Priory of Sion was first conceived. A humble Benedictine monk named Brother Aelric, with a heart full of faith and a mind full of secrets, set the wheels in motion. He was no ordinary monk. Aelric had a secret, a hidden archive of sacred knowledge passed through generations. It was said to be the true wisdom of the ancients, hidden from the world. But the priory was more than a place of worship. It was a fortress of secrecy, a refuge for those who dared to keep the truth alive. The monks who joined were chosen not for their piety, but for their silence. They guarded the knowledge with their lives, and in doing so, they became more than monks. They became legends, whispered of in hushed tones across centuries. And so, the Priory of Sion was born not just as a place of prayer, but as a sanctuary for the sacred, the hidden, and the eternal. You remember the first time you noticed something wasn't quite right, a flicker in the corner of your eye, a whisper that didn't belong to anyone in the room. It started with the silence too quiet, like the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to break. Then came the cold, a sudden chill that didn't come from the air, but from the walls themselves, as if they were watching. You tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it as your imagination, but the feeling lingered, like a secret that had been waiting to be uncovered. And then, just as you were about to turn away, you heard it, a voice, soft and familiar, calling your name from the silence. You ever notice how some places just feel heavier than others? The Priory of Sion wasn't built with stone, it was built with silence. And that silence? It swallowed voices. One autumn evening, a young woman named Isolde entered the priory, her footsteps echoing like a heartbeat in the void. She had come seeking answers about her mother, about the past, about the place itself. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They say she heard voices in the walls, whispering in a language she didn't know. Some say she was possessed. Others say she was trying to speak to the ghosts of the priory itself. And to this day, the priory still waits for someone to come to ask the same questions and to hear the same answer echoing through the silence louder than ever. I've spoken to a few locals who say they saw a figure in the old priory gardens just before dawn. It wasn't a ghost, not exactly, but it was something. Something that knew them by name. One woman claims she heard whispers coming from the chapel, even though she was alone. She said it wasn't voices, more like the sound of pages turning in an old book. No one believes her now, Another man told me he once saw a child's toy floating just above the floor in the Great Hall. It was a wooden soldier, untouched by time, and it hovered there like it was waiting for someone. And then there's the farmer who swore he saw a light coming from the priory walls at night like a candle flickering in a window that wasn't there. He said it was a warning, and he never returned. These stories don't make sense, but they linger. They're not just tales of fear, they're memories of something that never left. The first clue came in the form of a faded journal, its pages brittle and yellowed, like the skin of an old woman who's seen too much. It spoke of a hidden room, a place where the light never reached. We followed the journal's directions to a sealed stone door, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to shift when you looked away. It was as if the walls themselves were watching. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something that had lingered for centuries. The walls were lined with books, but the titles were in a language I couldn't place. One book, however, caught my eye. It was open to a page that had been written in a hand that felt almost familiar. The words were not in English, but the meaning was clear. The truth waits in the silence. As we moved deeper, the silence grew heavier, pressing in like a hand on the shoulder. And in that silence, we heard it, a whisper, just at the edge of hearing, repeating the same phrase over and over. You see it now, don't you? That one detail. The one thing that's just there, like a whisper in the dark, waiting to be heard. It's not the blood, not the bones, not the whispers in the wind. It's something else entirely. Something that should have been explained, but never was. That smear. That one little smear. Like someone tried to erase something, but the ink still clings to the page, like a secret refusing to let go. And you know what? No one's ever figured out what it was. No one's ever dared to ask. That's the thing about secrets. They don't always need to be answered. They just need to be remembered. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That the Priory of Sion isn't just a ruin, it's a place where the past still lingers, and the air hums with something older than stone. Some say the stones remember. That the walls were built not just by hands, but by voices, by prayers, by secrets buried deep in the earth, secrets that won't stay buried. Theories are as plentiful as the fog here. Some say the priory was cursed by a noble family who tried to hide their dark past. Others insist the monks who lived there were not monks at all, but something else entirely. And then there are those who say the priory isn't haunted by the dead, it's haunted by the living. That the people who once walked those halls still walk among us, just not quite the same. The truth, if it exists at all, is buried beneath layers of time, rumor, and the quiet, unshakable belief that some places are never truly empty. You see, the mystery of the Priory of Sion isn't just about the past, it lingers, like a shadow at the edge of the room, waiting for someone to finally turn the light on. No one has solved what happened there, and no one seems willing to admit they've tried. It's like the priory itself is holding its breath, waiting for the right question to be asked. So, as you walk away from this place, remember this. The priory isn't haunted by ghosts, it's haunted by questions. And some questions, my dear, are best left unanswered. But if you ever find yourself drawn back, don't be surprised if the stones whisper. They've been waiting, you know, and they've got a story to tell. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the screams or the shadows, but the silence that follows a story. It lingers like a ghost in the corner of your mind. The Priory of Sion may be gone, but its echoes remain. In the quiet of night, when the world has stilled, you might hear the faint sound of footsteps in an empty corridor. So, don't go away. The stories are never done, and the past is always listening. Until next time, take care, and remember, sometimes the best stories are the ones that leave you wondering. You've heard of the Appalachian Mountains, but have you ever wondered what lies just beyond the last gas station on Route 219? This is Trans-Allegheny County, where the road ends and the stories begin. Local legends say this toll booth isn't just a relic, it's a gateway. Some say it's a cursed checkpoint where the dead still collect tolls and the living pay in more than cash. There's a reason the road's called the Phantom Toll Booth, because it's the only one that doesn't end. And if you're not careful, you might find yourself paying a toll you never intended to pay. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself driving through Trans-Allegheny County and the road seems to stretch on forever, you might want to check the rearview mirror. Sometimes, the past isn't so easy to leave behind. You see, the toll booth wasn't just a gate, it was a contract. The county signed it in 1927, and the man who made it, Elias Grady, was a visionary. He promised a shortcut through the mountains, a lifeline for farmers and townsfolk. Elias wasn't a man who built things for the glory. he built for the people, or so he claimed. He said this road would bring prosperity, that it would pull the county out of its shadowy isolation. The locals called it the Phantom Toll Booth because no one could get through. It was like the mountains had a will of their own, and they didn't want to let anyone pass. Some say Elias's ghost still stands there, waiting for the right person to cross. Others say it's not a ghost, it's the mountain, and it's never letting go. You know, the first time it really felt like something was off was when the road signs started changing on their own. One moment you're driving down Route 62, and the next, the sign says welcome to Trans-Allegheny County. But you're not even close to that place yet. Then the radio started playing a song you never heard before. Not just any song, but one that felt like it had been written for you. The words were familiar, but the melody was wrong, like it was trying to remind you of something you had forgotten. You tried to laugh it off, of course. Just some weird trick of the mind. But the next day, your car was found parked in a place you never drove to. The GPS said it was on a different road altogether, and the gas tank was empty. And then the toll booth. It wasn't there before, but when you turned around, there it was, right in the middle of the road. No gate, no booth, just a wooden structure with a sign that read welcome to Trans-Allegheny County. And it was smiling. You remember the last time you saw the toll booth? It was just a rusted metal arch, barely visible in the fog, like a forgotten relic of some old highway. But something changed that night, something that never made it into the news. A man named Walter Grimes was driving home that evening, his headlights cutting through the dark. He said he saw something in the rear view, a figure, tall and pale, standing just beyond the edge of the road. He never made it home. The next morning, his car was found in the same spot, the engine still running, the radio playing a static-filled news report about a missing hiker in the nearby woods. No one knew he was even there. The police ruled it an accident, but the local folks knew better. Walter had a wife who never left the house and a son who never returned from college. The toll booth had taken something, and it wasn't just his car. To this day, no one has seen the toll booth again. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the hum of its gate just before the fog rolls in and everything disappears. I've spoken with several locals who swear they've seen the toll booth flicker in the distance, like a ghostly sign caught in a storm. One man said it looked like it was made of old rusted iron, and the light inside was a deep, sickly green. Another witness described hearing a low, mournful hum coming from the booth, like a radio tuned to a dead frequency. It wasn't loud, but it made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. One woman claimed she saw a figure in the booth, dressed in a long, dark coat, standing motionless as if waiting for someone. She said it looked like a man, but the face was blurred, like it was made of smoke. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. There's a quiet consensus among those who have seen it. The toll booth is a warning, not an invitation, and no one wants to cross it, even if they're just passing through. We started with the toll booth itself, and you know what? It wasn't even there anymore. Just a rusted frame, half buried in the mud, like it had been waiting for someone to finally remember it. The local historian said it was built in the 1920s, just before the highway was rerouted. But the records? They were missing. Like the toll booth itself, they had vanished without a trace. Then there was the truck, a rusted 1965 Ford, found in the woods, its engine frozen, like it had just stopped and never moved again. The owner said he'd driven past it every day for a year, and it never moved. And the most peculiar thing? The toll booth's license plate. It was still there, but the numbers had changed. From toll 123 to toll 124, like it was counting something we couldn't see. We found the logbook, too. It was in the back of a shed, filled with dates and names, but no faces. Just names, and some notes about the road getting longer. Like the toll booth was trying to tell us something, but in riddles. You know, there's one thing about the phantom toll booth that has always left everyone scratching their heads. It's not the toll booth itself, or the eerie silence that hangs over the road. No, it's the way the light seems to shift just before the toll booth appears. Some say it's the light of the toll booth itself, but no one has ever seen it clearly. It's like the road is alive, and it's choosing when to show itself. And when it does, it's as if the world holds its breath. They say it's a warning, a signal from something that doesn't want to be found. Or maybe it's a beacon, leading people to a place they're not meant to see. But no one has ever been brave enough to follow it all the way. And that's the thing, isn't it? No one ever goes all the way. No one ever gets a clear look. No one ever gets to the other side. Just the light, and the silence, and the feeling that something is watching. You've heard the stories, but have you ever asked yourself what the toll booth really meant? Some say it was a gateway to a forgotten world. Others whisper it was a test of character. What if the toll wasn't for the road, but for the soul? One local legend claims the toll booth was built by a group of outlaws who vanished without a trace. They left behind a trail of eerie silence and a map that no one can read. Have you ever wondered what happened to them? Some say the toll booth was a trick by the forest itself, a way to keep people from crossing into the unknown. Others believe it was a warning too late for those who tried to go through. What would you do if you saw it standing there, unguarded? And then there's the theory that the toll booth is still there, waiting for someone brave enough to take the road. But what if it's not a road at all? What if it's a path to something far more dangerous than you ever imagined? So, what do you think? Is the toll booth a story, or is it a door? And if it's a door, do you ever wonder what's on the other side? You've heard the stories, but the truth is still locked away in a file cabinet, buried beneath decades of silence. No one's ever found the missing woman, and no one's ever spoken of her again. The last report was filed in 1965, and notes scribbled by a young officer who never followed up. He said the woman vanished in the woods, and the case was closed. But the woods still remember. They say she was searching for something or someone, and that's why she never made it back. But who was she, and what did she leave behind? The case is cold, the trail is gone, and the only thing left is a silence that feels too heavy for a woman who never had a chance to speak. So now, you're left to wonder, was she ever real? Or was she just a story waiting for someone to believe in? You know, sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones with ghosts, but the ones that make you wonder if you've ever truly left a place behind. I've told you tales of haunted highways, but maybe the real toll booth is the one you never realize you've crossed. And sometimes, the road doesn't end where you think it does. It just keeps going. So, when you think you've left the past behind, maybe the past has already left you. Now, I think I'll tell you a story about a woman who never made it past the toll booth. You've heard of haunted houses, but have you ever heard of a haunted choir? Priory Hill is a place that's been silent for over a century, but the echoes of its past still linger in the air. You can almost hear them, can't you? Once, this hill was home to a grand abbey, a place of prayer and learning. But then came the Reformation, and with it, fire, blood, and the end of a sacred song. The monks were gone, their voices silenced by history but not by the land. Now, the wind carries a strange, mournful sound through the trees. It's not the wind, though it's a voice, a choir, singing in a language long forgotten. You can't quite make out the words, but you know they're calling to you. Some say the voices are the souls of the monks trapped between worlds, unable to move on. Others say it's a warning, a message from the past that the land still remembers. But one thing is certain, this place is not empty. And so, we begin our journey into the heart of Priory Hill. We'll uncover the truth behind the voices, the history of the abbey, and the ghosts who still call this place home. But be warned, once you hear the choir, you may never truly leave. You know, the first time the choir sang at Priory Hill, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming lilacs. The abbey was still young, and the monks were trying to carve out a place in the world. They sang for the king, for the queen, for the souls of the dead, but the music was different, deep, haunting, like it had been carried through the centuries from somewhere else entirely. The legend says the choir was cursed by a nun who had once sung to a devil in the woods. She was said to have made a pact, and the voices of the choir became her prison, echoing through the stones for eternity. Some say the choir still sings at midnight, when the wind howls through the valley and the hills tremble with an old, familiar pain. It's a song that never ends, and it never forgets. You remember the first time you heard it, that low, mournful hum beneath the surface of the world. It was like the earth itself was weeping, and you couldn't tell if it was a storm or something far worse. The neighbors said it was just the wind, but the wind didn't hum like that. It didn't sound like anything from this world. It was something that had been buried, and it was waking up. Then came the disappearances, not the kind you read about in the paper, but the kind that left people wondering if they were ever there at all. You could feel it in the silence where they used to be. The town tried to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening, but you could feel the weight of it pressing in, like the earth was holding its breath, waiting for something to finally break through. And then, one by one, the voices began, not loud, not shouting, but a whisper that came from the very ground beneath you, like the past was trying to reach out and say, "Remember us." You remember the sound of children's laughter, bright and clear, echoing down the hill. But now, it's just the wind, whispering through the hollows of the old stone walls. One September night, the bells stopped ringing. The choir was supposed to sing the requiem, but no one showed up. The caretaker found the doors locked from the inside, and the windows were all sealed. The parishioners whispered that the children had been taken by the hill by the spirits that haunt this place. But the police found no evidence, no bodies, no clues, just silence where there should have been song. Years later, the chapel was abandoned. The wind still carries their voices, just not the ones you expect. You can hear them, sometimes, in the echo of the bells, too perfect, too clear. And now, on the anniversary, the bells ring again. Not for a service, not for a funeral, just a whisper of what was lost and what still lingers in the silence between the notes. I've spoken to dozens of locals, and one woman, Margaret, described hearing the choir at 3 a.m. just as the wind howled through the pines. She said the voices were sweet, but the silence afterward made her feel like she was being watched. Another man, James, swore he saw a child's doll sitting on the steps of the old chapel, untouched by the wind. He said it looked like it had been there for years, yet it was brand new the day he found it. One old woman, Lillian, told me the choir sings only when the moon is full, and the wind is just right. She said it's like the air itself is weeping, and she can feel the sorrow in her bones. Some say the voices are a warning, others say they're a lullaby for the lost. But what if they're calling for something else entirely? What if the choir isn't just remembering the past, but waiting for the future? We began with the old records, you know. The town clerk had a drawer full of yellowed pages, and one of them mentioned a choir that vanished in the 1920s. They sang so beautifully that the whole town would gather to listen, but then nothing. Just silence, like the music had been stolen by the wind. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40-oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The next day, we drove up the hill and found the old church ruins. Moss clung to the stones like old memories, and the air smelled like damp wood and something faintly sweet. It was hard not to feel like we were being watched. We followed the trail of old diaries and found a woman who had lived in the area for decades. She described the choir as like a lullaby that never ends. She said the voices were there, but only if you listened closely, and only when the wind was just right. Then came the strange things, the lights in the night, the voices on the radio, the smell of lavender in the air when no one had lit a candle. It wasn't just a ghost story anymore. It was a living mystery, and we were only just beginning to understand it. You know, there's one thing they've never been able to explain. Every time they dig deeper, they just find more questions. The choir, the music, the silence, it's like something's still watching, waiting. They found the records of the choir, the names of the children, the dates of their songs. But no one can tell you why the music stopped. No one can tell you where the voices went. They think it's just a ghost, a memory, a child's voice lingering in the stones. But I tell you, it's not just a voice. It's a warning, and it's been waiting for someone to listen. So what do you think? Was it a child's song, or something far older? Something that was never meant to be heard again? I think we're all just waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the choir isn't just singing, it's screaming, and no one dares to say why. Some say the children who vanished from Priory Hill were never truly gone, that they're still here, trapped in the stone, their voices echoing through the halls of the old abbey. Others think the choir was cursed by the last abbess, who made a pact with something old and hungry. She traded their voices for power, and the price was their souls. Still, some say the real tragedy isn't the missing children or the ghosts, it's the silence. The silence that has fallen over this place since the last voice was heard. So when you're here, remember, the choir isn't just singing, it's calling. And sometimes, the answer is louder than you want to hear. And still, to this day, the echoes of that choir remain, hidden in the silence between the notes of the wind and the creak of the old wooden beams. Do you hear it now, just beyond the edge of your hearing? The local historian, a retired school teacher named Margaret, has spent decades trying to piece together the truth. But every time she gets close, the records vanish like mist in the morning. The town has long since buried its grief, but the hill remembers. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the children singing, still, still, still. So, what do you think? Did they find them, or are they still waiting for someone to come listen? I wonder if they ever stopped singing. You ever notice how the wind whispers different things in different places? It's like it's trying to tell you something, but you just can't quite catch the words. Maybe some places hold more than just memories. Maybe they hold secrets that aren't meant to be forgotten or heard. So, as we turn the page, let's not forget that the stories we hear today might just be the ones that echo through the hills tomorrow. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I hear something in the distance. You've heard of the Arctic, but have you ever considered what it might be like to be lost in it? Imagine a place where the sun never rises, where the wind howls like a ghost, and where no one ever returns. In the 1840s, a group of men set off on an expedition to find a passage through the Arctic, only to vanish without a trace. Their ships, the Erebus and Terror, were meant to be sturdy, but the ice was not kind. Now, over a century and a half later, those ships sit in the ice waiting. Some say they're still there, and others say they've been claimed by the Arctic itself. But what really happened to them? You might think, how could they have disappeared so completely? But the truth is, the Arctic doesn't care about human ambition. It takes what it wants, and sometimes it takes everything. So, as we step into the story of the Franklin expedition, we're not just following the trail of a lost crew. We're following the trail of a place that still remembers them and that may never let them go. You know, the Franklin expedition wasn't just a voyage, it was a grand experiment in human ambition. Sir John Franklin, a man who believed he could conquer the Arctic, gathered a team of the finest men of his time, all sworn to push the boundaries of the known world. They set sail from England in 1845, 2 ships, 100 men, and a mission that would be remembered as one of the greatest tragedies in the history of exploration. It was a time of imperial pride, and they were the chosen few to carry the flag. The men were well equipped, trained, and ready, but the Arctic is a merciless place, and it would not let them go so easily. Their story would be one of endurance, of silence, and of a fate that no map could predict. And so, with the last of their supplies, they set foot on a land that would take everything from them. The expedition was doomed from the start, but no one could have known that at the time. Not even Franklin himself. You remember the letters, don't you? The ones that came from the Arctic, full of optimism, full of hope. But then the silence. It wasn't just a pause. It was a stop sign, a red flag waving in the wind. The first missive was dated October 1845. We are in fine spirits and in excellent health. Then nothing. No more postmarks. Just a gaping void, like a door that had been closed and never opened. They said the ice had grown too thick too fast, that the men had been trapped. But no one believed them. Not at first. It was just a story, a sailor's tale, a ghost in the fog. But then came the second letter, a fragment, a single page, dated 1848. We are all very well and have no fear of death. And then nothing, just a blank page, and a hand that had written it, but no one to read it. And that was it. The silence grew louder, the stories grew darker, and somewhere in the ice, the men who had gone to find a path to the North Pole were lost. Not in the snow, but in the silence. In the waiting. You see it now, don't you? That frozen moment in time, the last light before the darkness took them. A campfire flickering low, shadows stretching long over the snow, and then nothing. The cold crept in, slow and sure, like a living thing. The men were strong, well-fed, and prepared, but something in the ice changed. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way the wind howled like a lost soul, echoing through the empty Arctic. They didn't hear it at first. They didn't believe it. The last written words were about the hunger. Not for food, but for something deeper. Something they couldn't name. They spoke of dreams, of voices in the dark, of a place that called them. And then the silence. The silence that never ends. And so they vanished. Not in a storm, not in a fight, but in the quietest, most cruel way. The ice swallowed them whole, and the world turned away. No one knew where they went. No one knew what they found. Just that they were never the same again. I remember the way the wind howled through that frozen tundra, like it was trying to carry a message just out of reach. The men, they spoke in whispers, as if the ground itself might hear. One of the last survivors, a man named John Franklin, wrote of the ice cracking beneath their feet like a living thing. He said the sea itself seemed to be holding its breath. There's a story about a dog who stayed with them until the end. They found the bones years later, frozen in the ice, with a tiny piece of meat still clutched in its jaws. Some say the ice remembers, that it holds the voices of those who were lost, and that if you listen closely enough, you can hear them whispering through the wind. And so, we return to the silence, to the frozen silence that guard their secrets, waiting for someone to listen, to remember, and to hear what the eyes won't say. You know, the more they dug into the Franklin expedition's disappearance, the more the records started to shift like sand. Old journals, letters, and ship logs were missing, and when they found what was left, it was like the past had been rewritten. They found a letter from Franklin himself, written in a hurry, filled with strange warnings about ice and things that move in the dark. But it was signed with a different ink, like someone had tried to forge his hand. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And then there were the maps. Some had been altered, with strange symbols scrawled in the margins. Others had entire sections erased, as if the explorers had tried to hide something they couldn't explain. The most unnerving thing? The people who had studied Franklin's journey for decades started to question their own memories. Some claimed they had seen the same strange symbols in dreams, or heard whispers from the ice at night. And so, the investigation didn't end. It just changed. The more they uncovered, the more they realized they were no longer just searching for Franklin. They were searching for something else, something that had been waiting all along. You know, there's one thing about the Franklin expedition that still haunts me. Not the cold, not the hunger, not even the madness. It's the one detail that has never been explained. They found the ships, you see, but not the men. And yet, the journals? Some were found, some were lost. But one journal, just one, was left behind, untouched, in the snow. They never found the author of that journal. Not the name, not the signature. Just a single page, untouched, as if the man had never been there at all. And that's the thing. The one thing that's never been explained. Was he lost? Was he found? Or did he just vanish, like the rest of them? Some say the ice isn't just cold, it's alive. They whisper that the frozen tundra remembers, that it holds the breath of the lost. Have you ever felt the silence too long? There's a tale that the ice cracks like a heartbeat, and if you listen closely, you might hear the echoes of those who vanished. Do you think they're still out there, somewhere, in the dark? And then there are the stories of the last survivors, those who came back, only to vanish again. Have you ever wondered if they ever truly left? The stories aren't just about the past, they live on in the wind, the ice, and the silence. And sometimes, if you listen just right, you might hear them speak. And so, we return to the question that has haunted the Arctic for over a century: what really happened to Franklin and his men? Was it the ice, the cold, or something far more sinister that claimed them? We've searched every crevice of the Arctic, but the truth remains just out of reach, like a ghost that refuses to be caught. Some say the ice remembers, some say the cold still whispers their names, and some say the only thing that's truly vanished is the truth. So, as the sun sets on another day in the Arctic, we're left with more questions than answers. And that, dear friends, is the truest kind of haunting. You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. A quiet room, a cold wind, a lone candle flickering in the dark, those are the things that whisper the loudest. And sometimes, the ghosts aren't of the past. They're of the present, lingering in the spaces between our memories and the stories we carry. So, as we close this chapter, I'll leave you with a thought. What stories do you carry with you? And what do you hear when the world is still? And remember, the next story is waiting just beyond the silence. You've heard of haunted places, but have you ever heard of a church that sounds like it's giving birth in the night? Bideford Church, in the heart of Devon, is said to have a voice that's not just heard, but felt. Built in the 12th century, this church has stood through wars, plagues, and the passage of time. But it's the whispers that echo through its halls that have kept locals from sleeping soundly for centuries. The stories say the voice is not a ghost, but something older, something that was never meant to be born, and never meant to stay quiet. Locals say the sound comes from the very foundation of the church, from the womb of stone and time. Some say it's the cry of a child who never left. Others say it's the whisper of a curse that still lingers. What could have caused such a sound? What is it that still lives here, trapped between the sacred and the forbidden? And why does it scream only when the world is quiet enough to hear? You know, the first whispers of the Bideford Church's haunting came not from a ghost, but from a man named John Henshaw. He was the one who built this place in the 14th century, but not with good intentions. He wasn't just a builder, he was a smuggler, a man who moved goods and secrets through the dark channels of the sea. But he had a wife, and she wasn't pleased with his shady dealings. The church was built on a site where the sea once roared and the wind howled like a mournful wail. It was a place where the living and the dead seemed to share the same air. But the real story, that's where the real horror begins. You'll have to come back to hear how the church became a tomb for secrets and a cradle for screams. You remember the way the air felt in Bideford, that hush before the storm. It wasn't just the wind, it was like the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The first signs were subtle, like a whisper in the back of your mind. People started talking about the bell not ringing on time, or the clock in the rectory stopping just as the sun dipped below the hills. Then came the rumors that the bell had a voice, that it called out at night, not in words, but in a sound like a woman's cry, low and drawn out, like something was screaming inside the stone. The townsfolk dismissed it at first, laughing over tea and crumpets. But the sound grew louder, and the bell began to ring on its own, not in the night, but in the morning, just before the first light touched the rooftops. And then, the first disappearance. A young woman, no older than 20, vanished the day the bell rang 3 times in quick succession, as if it were trying to say something. You remember the sound, don't you? A low, guttural cry, like something ancient and wounded, echoing through the stone walls of Bideford Church. It wasn't a child's cry, no. This was something older, something lost. It happened on a stormy October night, the kind where the wind howls like it's trying to carry secrets away. The church was empty, save for the one woman who had come to pray alone, in the dark. The church has never been the same since. Some say the sound still comes at night, a whisper of sorrow and cry from the past that refuses to be silenced. Others say the walls remember, and they're not done telling their story. And you, dear listener, have heard the cry. Now, do you think it's a warning or just the echo of a soul that never left? I remember the way the silence would fall, like a curtain drawn across the room. The church was still, but the air was thick with something that made your skin crawl, like the ghost of a scream. One woman said she heard the sound first, like a baby wailing in the dark. Then the walls started to bleed literally, she said, though I wonder if she was just trying to make sense of the madness. Another visitor claimed she felt the cold not from the air, but from the walls themselves. She said they were warm and alive, like they knew she was there and were waiting for her to leave. They all said the same thing: something was watching. Not in the way you think, it was in the way the air moved, the way the light shifted, like the church was alive and had a heartbeat all its own. Some say the screams are the voices of the unborn, trapped in the stone. Others say it's the church itself, remembering the sins of those who built it. I just know that if you walk in, you might never walk out the same. We began our investigation by stepping into the hush of the Bideford Church, where the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The silence was so thick, you could almost hear it pressing against your ears. The first thing we found was a loose brick in the wall, hidden beneath centuries of dust and the weight of time. It led to a small, damp chamber, its walls slick with mildew and memory. Inside, we found a sealed wooden box, its edges warped and stained with age. It contained a single, yellowed letter, written in a trembling hand, pleading for help. The letter spoke of a woman who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only this plea and the echo of her final scream, which still lingers in the stone walls. As we left, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest sound, a whisper, like the woman's voice, just before the silence swallowed it whole. You know, the thing that's really bugged me about this whole thing is that no one ever figured out what the screaming was. Was it a ghost, a child, or just the wind? And if it was a child, where did they go? The locals say it was a girl, maybe a baby, who cried so loud they could hear it in the village. But no one ever saw her. Just the sound, and then silence. And here's the weird part. No one ever found a body. Not even a shoe, a toy, or a single strand of hair. Just the sound, and then nothing. Maybe the scream was just a trick of the wind. Or maybe it was something worse. But no one ever says for sure. And that's what really haunts me. So what do you think? Was it a child? Or just the wind? Or something else entirely? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the locals actually say? Some say the church was built on a witch's grave, others whisper it was a place of ancient rituals. What do you think really happened there? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Depth smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. There's a theory that the church was once a pagan temple, and the screams you hear are the voices of those who were sacrificed. But how do you prove a ghost is a ghost? The town elders say the church is haunted by a child's voice, a girl who died in the 1700s. But others say it's a trick of the mind, a story passed down to keep the dark quiet. What's more real than a legend? And then there's the theory that the screams are just the wind, or the sound of the earth shifting beneath the church. But if that were true, why do so many people swear they've heard it in the dead of night? Even now, decades later, the whispers still echo through the stone. No one can say for sure what happened that night, whether it was a crime, a curse, or something far older than us. The records are missing, the witnesses have passed, and the townsfolk won't speak of it. It's as if the church itself has chosen to forget, or perhaps to remember in its own way. And so, the church remains part museum, part mystery, and part warning. You can visit, but you'll never truly leave the same. The scream that once echoed through these halls is gone, but the silence that follows is louder than any sound. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that whisper from the silence between the words. The Bideford Church may be ancient, but it's the echoes of those who came before that linger longest. So, as you turn the page, remember that the truest horrors are those we can't quite see. And if you hear something, just remember, it might be the wind, or it might not. But don't worry, the next tale is waiting, just beyond the edge of the firelight. Now, shall we light the next candle? You've heard of the Priory of Sion? haven't you? A place that whispers secrets through the stones, as if the past refuses to stay buried. It's not just a ruin, it's a story that refuses to be forgotten. Nestled in the hills of France, it's been called a sanctuary of knowledge, a hiding place for secrets too dangerous to be told. But the locals, they say it's not just books that were hidden, there's something else, something older, something that doesn't want to be found. Some say the priory was built to protect a truth that could change the world. Others say it was built to keep a truth from ever being known. Either way, the stones here have a memory, and it's not one you'll forget. And now, as the centuries pass, the priory stands as a quiet monument to the mysteries it holds. A place where history, legend, and something else, something unseen, still lingers in the silence. You know, the priory of Sion didn't start as a place of horror, but as a refuge. Back in the 12th century, a group of scholars and knights gathered here, seeking shelter from the chaos of the Crusades. They were called the Knights of the White Lily, a secret brotherhood sworn to protect knowledge and preserve the sacred texts of the ancient world. So, you remember how the air smelled in that old priory, like dust and damp stone, and the way the light barely reached the floor. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. One morning, the caretaker found the floorboards creaking without a footstep. He checked the hallway again, no one was there. Just the sound, and the feeling that something had moved. The next day, the bell tolled on its own, not once but 3 times, echoing through the empty halls. The caretaker said it sounded like a voice, faint but clear, calling his name. Then came the whispers in the library. Not the kind you hear when you're tired, but something older, something that had been there all along, waiting to be heard. By the time the caretaker left, he had a new habit, looking over his shoulder, even when he was alone, and he never told anyone about the voice that called him from the silence. You see it now, don't you? That moment when the silence broke, and the stone walls seemed to hold their breath. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of something unseen, like the very stones remembered the screams. Then came the sound, a whisper, not of words, but of a voice. It slithered through the cracks like smoke, curling around your ears, filling your mind with a name you didn't know you knew. And then, the silence returned, not the kind that lulls, but the kind that holds you in its grip. The walls no longer whispered, they were watching, waiting for you to remember. You felt in your bones. The priory was not just haunted, it was trying to tell you something. Something you had forgotten, but it had never stopped remembering. I met a woman who swore she saw a figure in the gardens, wearing a long, dark cloak, just before the storm hit. She said it turned and looked right at her, then vanished into the mist. Another said she heard a child's laughter echoing through the halls, but when she followed it, there was no one there, just the sound of wind through broken windows. A local historian told me the place was built on ancient burial grounds. He said the stones themselves whisper secrets to those who listen closely enough. And then there was the nun who lived there for years. She said the place wasn't haunted, it was broken, and it was waiting for someone to fix it. We dug deeper, chasing whispers that the priory of Sion wasn't just a place, it was a secret so buried, even the stones seemed to remember. One night, I found a ledger from 1542, pages filled with strange symbols and names that felt like they were meant for someone else's story. Then there was the letter, unsigned but unmistakably personal. It spoke of betrayal, of blood, and of a truth that had been hidden for centuries. I realized that the priory wasn't just haunted, it was haunted by the ghosts of its own secrets, and I was beginning to feel their weight. You see it now, don't you? That single, unbroken line of dust on the floor, stretching like a silent accusation from the door to the altar. No one has explained it. No one has even tried. It's not just dust. It's not just age. It's something else. Something that moves. Something that waits. Something that has never been explained. Perhaps it's a clue. Perhaps it's a warning. Or maybe it's just a line of dust, and we're the ones who have never figured out what it means. But no one has ever explained it, and no one ever will. Because the truth, like the dust, is always just out of reach. You've heard the names, but what did the locals really say? Some swear the priory still hums with the whispers of those who never left. Others say the stones remember, and the wind carries their names in a language only the lost can understand. They say the monks who vanished were not taken by bandits, but by something older, something that lurked in the shadows of the forest and waited for the right moment to claim them. Some say it's a curse, others say it's a test. Some say the priory is a place where time stands still, and the past refuses to let go. Others say it's a place where the dead still walk, and the living are only ever visitors. Theories abound, but one thing remains clear. The priory of Sion is not just a place, it's a memory, a warning, and a mystery that refuses to be forgotten. and if you listen closely, you might just hear it calling your name. And so, dear friends, we return to the quiet hush of the priory, where the echoes of the past refuse to fade. What if the mystery isn't just in the stones, but in the silence between them? The last official records were sealed in 1972, and the priory was abandoned. But some say the monks never truly left, just waiting for the right moment to speak. The priory's story isn't just about the past, it's about the present. And maybe, just maybe, it's about us. Are we ready to face what we've buried? So dear listeners, as you turn off this story, remember this: some secrets are not meant to be solved, they're meant to be felt. And some echoes, like the priory's, are never truly gone. You might think the priory's secrets are buried with its stones, but sometimes the past has a way of whispering through the wind, through the trees, through the silence between heartbeats. We've told you the stories, but the truth is often quieter than the tales we spin. It's in the way the light shifts at dusk or the way the air feels heavier in certain rooms. And remember, the echoes of the past are not always meant to be understood. Sometimes, they're meant to be felt. But before we move on, I'll leave you with this: the priory is not the end of the story. It's only the beginning of the silence. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another tale to tell. One that's waiting just beyond the next hill and the next breath. You've heard of the Holocaust, of course. But what if I told you that beneath the ruins of Warsaw, the ghosts of the ghetto still whisper, waiting for someone to listen? This was once a city of life, of laughter, of dreams. But then the Nazis came, and everything changed. The ghetto became a place of suffering, of silence, and of unimaginable loss. You've heard the stories, haven't you? Of the hidden bunkers, of the underground resistance, of the brave few who fought back. But what about the ones who didn't survive? What about the ones who were never found? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub Diff, the smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. These are the stories we've forgotten, the voices we've let fade. But if you're listening, if you're here, then maybe it's time to remember. So honor, to listen. You know, the story of the Warsaw Ghetto begins not with bombs or blood, but with a simple, terrible decision. In 1940, the Nazis decided that a part of Warsaw would become a prison for Jews, a place where they would be forced to live in unbearable conditions with no hope of escape. They called it the ghetto, but it wasn't a place. It was a cage, a place where over 400,000 Jews were packed into a fraction of the city, without food, without shelter, and without any real hope of survival. The Nazis didn't just imprison the Jews, they starved them, worked them to death, and made them live in a place that was designed to break their spirits. It was a slow, cruel form of death, and it didn't take long for people to start disappearing. And then came the deportations. People were taken away in trucks, under the cover of night, with no explanation, no warning. Some were sent to concentration camps, others were never seen again. It was a time of silence and fear, and the ghetto became a place where the worst of humanity was unleashed. But even in the darkest of times, there were moments of resistance. Some tried to fight back, others tried to survive, and for those who were taken away, their stories were left behind, like echoes in the silence of the ghetto. You know how sometimes, in the quietest moments, the world seems to hold its breath? Well, that's exactly what happened in Warsaw in 1940. The streets were still, the air thick with something more than smoke, like the city itself was waiting. People began to notice the absence, not just of the usual sounds, but of the people. A child's toy left on the doorstep, a loaf of bread that never went missing. The city was changing, but no one knew how. Then came the whispers, not of war, but of something else. A child's laughter in an empty alley, a voice calling out from a house that had long been abandoned. The city was no longer just a place, it was a living thing, and it was speaking. And then, one by one, the first disappearances, not of soldiers, not of the strong, but of the quiet ones, the ones who had stayed behind, who had believed they could outlast the storm. You see, the city had not been taken by force, it had been taken by silence. And in that silence, the forgotten began to stir. You know how sometimes, in the quietest moments, you feel a presence, like someone watching from the edge of your vision? That's how it began for the people of the Warsaw Ghetto when the silence became too loud and the darkness too close. The last night of the uprising, they were trapped, no escape, no hope, only the cold steel of bullets and the sound of boots on pavement. Some say the air itself held their breath, waiting for the end. Then came the silence, not of peace, but of something deeper, something that lingers, not in the mind, but in the bones. Some say the spirits of those who died never left, and that their voices can still be heard in the stillness of the night. There are no graves, no markers, just the echoes of a place that once burned and the ghosts of those who were never buried. The ghetto is not just a memory, it's a wound, and the pain still lingers in the air. I remember the way the wind used to howl through the ruins, like it was trying to carry something away. Some say it's the whispers of those who never made it out. One survivor told me how the air would grow heavy, and the children would stop crying. It was as if the world had forgotten them, and they had forgotten how to breathe. They said the screams didn't stop, even after the fighting was over. Some claimed they could hear them in the wind, or in the silence that followed. Even now, when the world is quiet, the echoes of that place remain. Some say it's not the ghosts that haunt us, but the memory of those who were never heard. The team arrived at the site, expecting to find the remnants of a wartime archive. But what they found was something far stranger: shelves with names written in blood, still fresh, as if the ghosts had just finished their work. One name stood out: Lena Kowalska, a local woman who had vanished during the war. The team had assumed she was a victim, but now the question was she a prisoner, or had she been a witness to something far more terrible? As the team moved through the room, they noticed the air was colder than the rest of the building, a chill that seemed to come from the walls themselves, as if the building was holding its breath. One of the researchers noticed something odd: a small, folded note tucked beneath the shelf. It read, "They are not dead. They are waiting." The words were written in a child's hand with careful, uneven letters. The team left the room in silence, the weight of the message lingering. The question now was not just who these people were, but why they had been left behind, and what they were waiting for. There's one detail that has never been explained. A single, quiet thing that haunts the edges of every story about the Warsaw Ghetto. You've heard the names, the dates, the horror, but not this. It's not the screams, not the bombs, not even the silence that followed. It's the absence of a name. No one knows who they were. No one knows how they died. Just that they did. They say the ghosts still wait for someone to remember, to name them, to give them a place in the story. But no one has ever found that name. No one has ever asked the right question. And that's what makes it so strange. Not the death, not the suffering, but the silence. The way the world moved on and left them behind. Just one name, one voice, one soul, never spoken again. You've heard the stories about the Warsaw Ghetto, but have you ever wondered what the locals in the area still whisper about? Some say the ghosts of the victims haven't left the soil, and that the air still hums with their sorrow. One old man in the neighborhood claims he's seen a child's shadow lingering near the ruins of a former synagogue just after sunset. He says it vanishes when he tries to follow, like it's been waiting for someone to remember. Some locals claim they've heard voices in the night, calling out for help. They say it's not the wind, but the ghosts of those who were never found. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the past refuses to be buried. And then there are the ones who say the ghetto isn't just haunted by the past, it's haunted by the present. That the silence of the soil is not a comfort, but a warning. You know, sometimes the hardest thing to face isn't the ghost, but the silence that follows. The Warsaw Ghetto is still whispering, but no one's listening. Have you ever wondered what happens to a story when the world forgets it? There are no official records of how many perished there, no names carved into stone, just the echoes of 1,000 voices lost to history. Do you ever feel like some stories are meant to be told, but others just fade away? We can't change the past, but maybe we can honor it. Maybe the answer lies not in what was lost, but in what we choose to preserve. What would you do if you found a name you thought was forgotten? The mystery isn't just in the ghetto, it's in each of us. In the questions we don't ask, the stories we don't tell, and in the silence that still lingers, waiting for someone to speak. You know, sometimes the ghosts aren't the ones we expect. They're the ones who never got a chance to say goodbye. And in places like Warsaw, where history is written in blood and silence, the echoes are louder than the screams. Now let's gather round the fire, and let's hear the tale of a place where the dead still walk, and the living are never quite the same. You ready? The next story's waiting just like the ghosts in the walls. You've heard of the Library of Congress, the largest library in the world, but have you heard of the cursed archives? Deep in the bowels of the building, where the air is thick and the silence hums with secrets, there's a place that whispers in the dark. It's not the books that trouble the staff, but the way they seem to rearrange themselves, the way certain volumes vanish without a trace, and the way the catalog system keeps listing books that no longer exist. But what really unsettles the staff is the way the books seem to know when someone is watching. The moment you step into that room, it feels like the walls are closing in and the books are listening. There are rumors of voices, of footsteps, of the smell of ink and something else, something that doesn't belong to this world. And if you're not careful, the archive might remember you. So, are you ready to step into the archives and see what secrets lie hidden in the stacks? Or will you leave them to the ghosts who have made this place their home? You know, the Library of Congress wasn't always this grand. Back in the 1800s, it was just a small building in the heart of Washington, D.C., where a few brave souls decided to save America's stories from the flames of war and time. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They called it the Library of Congress, but at first, it was just a dream. A dream of preserving the nation's history before it was too late, before the Confederacy burned it all to the ground. As the library grew, so did its collections, but also its secrets. Some of the oldest books were said to be cursed, and others were written in languages no one could read. It was a place of wonder, and also of whispers. People began to say the library had a soul of its own, a guardian of knowledge, but also a keeper of the past. Some believed it protected the stories, others that it hid them for a reason. And so, the Library of Congress became more than just a building. It became a place of mystery where the past refused to stay buried, and the future felt like it was being written in ink that could never dry. You know how sometimes, in the quietest moments, a book just feels off? Like it's been waiting for you to notice it. The one on the shelf near the window. The one that's always been there, but now it's not. It's just still. Then the whispers start. Not loud, not angry, just a soft murmur, like the pages are breathing. You can't tell if it's the wind, or if someone's been reading in the dark. But you swear, the book is open now. And it's not just any book. You try to brush it off, like you always do. You've heard stories, after all. But then the pages start to turn on their own. Slowly, methodically, as if guided by something that knows exactly where to go. And the words they reveal, they're not just words, they're names. You realize now, with a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature, that this isn't just a book. It's a map to places that shouldn't exist, and a reminder that some things, once opened, can never be closed again. You remember that old book? The one with the cracked leather and faded gold leaf. The one that whispered when you opened it. That was the one they never found again. One librarian, a quiet woman named Elena, vanished the day after she borrowed it. She left a note on her desk, just a single word, unseen. They say she was last seen in the archives, walking toward the stacks, her coat trailing behind her like a phantom. No one heard her footsteps. No one saw her face. The book was never returned. And the archives? They've been sealed off ever since, with a single warning: do not read what you cannot unsee. Some say the book is still there. Some say it's not. But if you ever find it, remember, the words inside don't just tell a story. They change you. I've spoken to a retired librarian who swore he saw a figure in the stacks just after closing. He said it was tall, cloaked, and moved like it was being pulled by invisible strings. He called it the silent librarian. It never spoke, never moved too fast, and always seemed to vanish when he tried to get a closer look. Another employee, a young archivist, said she heard whispers in the catalog room just before she was about to leave for the night. She described the voices as old, like they were trying to remember something they'd forgotten. She never found the source of the whispers, and now she says she's never gone back to the catalog room after dark. She says it's not the silence that chills her, it's the sound of someone trying to speak, but not quite being heard. And then there's the man who claims he saw a ghost of a child running through the children's section. Not crying, not screaming, but just running like it was chasing something only it could see. We followed the trail of whispers through the stacks, where the dust motes danced like tiny ghosts in the beams of our flashlights. The air felt heavier, as if the past was pressing down on us. In the silence, we heard a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingers on a desk, echoing through the empty hall. It wasn't coming from anywhere we could see. She told us the building had been a repository for lost voices, and that some stories, once written, refused to be forgotten. Some just wait for the right reader. As we left, the door creaked shut behind us, and the tapping stopped. But the silence that followed was louder than the sound had ever been. The archives still wait, and so do the stories. But I wonder what will they tell us next time we dare to listen. You know, sometimes the most haunting thing isn't the ghost, but the silence that follows. The one detail that has never been explained is the sound of a single, soft click echoing through the empty halls of the Library of Congress at 3:17 a.m. It wasn't a door closing, not really. It was more like a whisper of something being moved. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something that never should have been found. No one knows who left it. No one knows why, and no one has ever tried to find out. Maybe that's the real curse, not the ghost, but the choice to let the mystery remain. The Library of Congress is full of history, but sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that never get told. And that, dear listeners, is the one detail that has never been explained. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the Library of Congress isn't just a place of books, but a place where the dead come to rest. Some say the library holds the souls of those who died in the fires of the past, trapped between the pages of history, waiting for someone to remember them. Then there are the stories of the ghost librarians, those who once worked here and were said to still walk the halls, sorting through the shelves, whispering in languages long forgotten. Some locals say the library is cursed by the weight of its own knowledge. That's not the books that are haunted, but the people who seek the truth too deeply. And then there are the rumors that the library is still searching for a missing book, one that holds the key to a mystery that has never been solved. So next time you pass the Library of Congress, maybe you'll listen for the whispers. Or maybe you'll just pretend you didn't hear anything at all. And so, we return to the quiet, persistent question that haunts this place. What happened to the missing volumes? No one knows? No one will ever know unless someone dares to ask. Some say the books were taken by the hands of a ghost. Others believe they were lost to time, or that they were never there at all. But the mystery remains, just like the silence of the empty shelves. The Library of Congress is a place of knowledge, but sometimes knowledge is a burden, and sometimes it's just too much for even the most patient of minds to hold. So, as we close this chapter, I leave you with a question. If you were to walk into that library tonight, what would you find? And more importantly, what would you do with it? The archives may be silent, but the stories they hold are never truly gone. They linger, waiting for someone to listen, to ask, and to remember. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones that fade into silence, like a whisper in the dark. The Library of Congress holds more than books, it holds the echoes of those who once walked these halls. It's not always the ghosts we fear, but the memories they carry. The weight of 1,000 lost voices, waiting to be heard again. And if you're ever lost in the stacks, don't be surprised if you hear a voice, just a whisper, asking, "Are you looking for something?" So, as we close this chapter, remember, the library is more than a building. It's a place where the past lingers and the stories are never truly finished. Now, let's turn the page. There's another tale waiting in the silence. You've heard of haunted places, but Priory Hill? That's a different kind of story. A place where the wind whispers secrets and the trees hold memories too heavy for the soil. Once a noble estate, now a crumbling ruin. The last family left in a hurry, their ghosts still tangled in the roots of the forest that swallowed their home. Locals say the hill was built on an old burial ground, and the earth still remembers. You can hear it in the wind, in the way the trees lean like they're listening. There's a legend about a child who vanished there, her laughter still echoing in the hollows. Some say she's still waiting for someone to find her. Now, the hill is a place of silence and stories. But if you're brave enough to walk its path, you might just hear something calling you back. You know, the first time the hill was noticed, it wasn't for the ghost. It was for the stones. These weren't just any stones, they were hauled from miles away, by hand, by a group of monks who believed the land itself was sacred. They called it the Holyscape, a place where the divine met the earth. But the work was never easy. The monks were often sick, and some claimed the hill itself resisted them, pushing the stones back down with an unseen hand. They built a chapel there, but the hill never stopped whispering. Some say the stones were cursed. Others say it was the monks' own fear that made the hill feel alive. Whatever the truth, the construction took years, and many never left. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The final stone was placed on a bitter winter night. The monks gathered in silence, and as the last stone settled into place, a sound like 1,000 stones clinking echoed through the hill. No one knew what it was, but it changed everything. And so the hill was born a place of prayer, of toil, and of something watching. The monks called it the Hollowing, not because it was empty, but because it was full of something they couldn't name. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. The air felt heavy, like the world had forgotten to breathe. The wind carried whispers, not words, but a presence like someone was watching, waiting. The cows in the pastures stopped mid-step. They stared into the distance, their eyes wide, unblinking. You thought it was the sun, but no, the sky was clear. Something was pulling their gaze, something unseen. Old Mrs. Whitlock, the woman who lived at the top of the hill, would close her shutters at midday. She never let anyone in, not even the priest. You could see her from the road, standing at her window, her face pale as the morning light. Then came the night the lights went out. Not just the lights, but the stars. The sky turned black, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. You couldn't find your way home, and the hill seemed to stretch forever, as if it had swallowed the earth itself. The next morning, the village was quiet. No one spoke of the night before, but you could see it in their eyes. Something had changed. The hill had started to whisper, and no one knew what it was saying. You remember the night the lights went out, and the wind started to howl like a wounded animal. It wasn't just the storm, it was something older, something watching from the dark. Mrs. Harlow said she saw a figure standing at the top of the hill, just before the power cut. She didn't run. She said she felt like she was being called, not chased. The next morning, her car was found at the base of the hill, the engine running, the keys in the ignition. No body, no sign of struggle, just a note in the glove box that read, "I had to leave." Neighbors say she was never the same after that. She started talking to the hill, whispering in the dark, and then she vanished, just like the lights. No one knows what happened. Some say the hill is a gateway. Others say it's a place where the living are taken. But one thing is certain, no one who goes there ever comes back the same. I've spoken to dozens of locals, and the stories they tell are as thick as the fog that rolls down Prairie Hill at dusk. One woman said she saw a man in a long coat standing at the edge of the woods, just before her car's headlights flickered out. Another claimed she heard a child's laughter echoing through the stone walls of the old manor, only to find no one home when she arrived. The laughter stopped the moment she opened the door. There's a retired teacher who insists he saw a woman in a 1920s dress walking the path near the old well. He said she didn't move when he called out to her, just stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, as if waiting. A few years back, a hiker said he saw a figure in the distance, but when he tried to follow, the path vanished beneath his feet. The only thing he found was a single, rusted key left at the edge of the woods. And then there's the farmer who swore he heard a voice calling his name at midnight, only to find the voice was coming from the well. He said it was a woman's voice, and it never stopped until he filled it with water. We began with the old records, you know, those yellowed pages tucked behind dusty desks. The first thing we found was a name, Margaret Halloway, a woman who vanished without a trace in 1923. The records didn't say much, just that she was last seen near the Priory ruins. But something about her name felt familiar, like a ghost trying to whisper through the silence. The diary described a ritual, something ancient and secretive, tied to the land itself. It warned of a price paid in silence, a price that Margaret may have tried to avoid. We followed the trail to the ruins, and there, in the hollow of the priory, we found something unexpected: old stones arranged in a circle, worn smooth by time, as if they had been used for something more than just shelter. The stones had a strange energy, a quiet hum that seemed to resonate in the bones. It was as if the land itself was remembering something, waiting for someone to listen. You know, the thing that has never been explained is the one detail that lingers like a whisper in the dark. No one knows why the hill was named Priory Hill in the first place. The records say it was once a monastery, but the monks vanished without a trace. No one remembers what they prayed for, or why they left their holy ground. You might think that would be the end of the story, but no. The hill still stands, and the name lingers like a question without an answer. A name that was never meant to be forgotten. So here's the thing. Maybe the hill was never just a hill. Maybe it was a place of power. And maybe the monks didn't vanish, they were never meant to be found. And that's why we're still here, asking the same question. Why the hill was named Priory. Why it was never just a hill. And why, to this day, it still feels like it's waiting for someone to listen. You know, some folks say the hill was built on an old burial ground. They whisper that the earth itself is still mourning. What if the stones hold more than just history? There's talk of a secret tunnel beneath the hill, one that leads to the old abbey. They say it's still open, and the wind howls through it like a warning. Have you ever heard that sound at night? Others believe the hill was cursed by a vengeful spirit. A noble woman, betrayed by her lover, is said to haunt the place. She's never seen, but you can feel her. Have you ever felt that chill in your bones without knowing why? And then there are the ones who say it's not a ghost, but a memory. That the hill is just a place where people go to find answers, and some never come back. What do you think happens when the hill falls? You've heard the whispers, the hushed conversations in the grocery store, the way the wind seems to carry a name you can't quite place. But no one has ever seen the thing, just felt it. The local historian says the hill was once a place of prayer, a refuge for the sick and the grieving. Now it's just a patch of land that no one wants to touch, even in the summer. Leela was 12 when she vanished. The last anyone saw her was in the woods, running after a ball that rolled down the hill. The ball was found days later, covered in mud and blood, but no one believes that. The sheriff's report says she was lost, wandered off, and never found. But the townsfolk know better. They say the hill is hungry, that it takes what it wants, and never gives anything back. To this day, no one dares to go up the hill at night. But the moon is full again, and the forest is quiet. And somewhere, the wind is whispering a name again. You know, sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones with ghosts, but the ones that make you wonder if you're the one who's been changed. The hill remembers, not in the way you'd expect. No screams, no smoke. Just the weight of silence pressing down like a heavy quilt. Some places don't just hold memories, they hold you. So, if you're ever feeling the weight of the world, remember this. Sometimes the best way to let go is to let the past speak. And now, if you're still with me, I have another tale to tell, one that's older than the hill and darker than the night. You've heard of the Tower of London, but have you ever wondered what secrets lie in its shadowy corridors? This is a place where history clings to the stone like ivy, and the air hums with stories of betrayal and tragedy. There's a staircase here, carved from ancient stone, that has been the subject of whispers for centuries. Some say it leads to the heart of the castle, others to a place beyond time where the dead still walk. You know, the Tower of London isn't just a castle, it's a living memory of power, betrayal, and blood. It started as a fortress, but it became something far more sinister. In 1066, William the Conqueror built it to show he'd conquered England and to keep the English in line. But it wasn't just a military base. It was a prison, a treasury, and a place where the powerful were made to suffer. One of the first prisoners was a young boy named Edward, the son of a rebellion leader. He was kept here for years, locked in a cell, so small he couldn't even stand up. His story is one of the first whispers that the tower has never forgotten. But the bloodstains on the stairs didn't come from just one tragedy. They were the result of centuries of executions, imprisonments, and secrets buried under the floorboards. The tower has seen more death than most people can imagine. And then there was Anne Boleyn. You know her story, how she was accused of treason, sent to the tower, and executed. Her fate is one of the most tragic, and it's said that her ghost still walks these halls looking for the truth. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. But the tower's history isn't just about the famous, it's about the many who were forgotten. The ones who were never given a name, a trial, or a place to rest. And their stories, like the blood on the stairs, are still waiting to be heard. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.